But what I find interesting about the looks is that you're either currently leaning into your screen going, oh my God, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen, or you're recoiling away going, oh my God, that is the most excessive, ugly thing I've ever seen.
Mechanically, look, you don't have to go very far to find a big long laundry list of everything that goes wrong with these, but you have to remember there are millions of these on the road. So surely they can't all be bad, right?
The overwhelming response I'm getting when driving this is just people going, what the f is that? Okay, so this might just be one of the most polarizing vehicles in the world. Depending on if you love or hate this thing, it either represents everything that is right or wrong with the automotive world. But who's right and who is wrong? Does it deserve the passionate acclaim or the very aggressive vitriol? You know what? We're about to find out. Now, obviously there's a whole truckload of details we need to cover in this video, but how about we start off with what commonly goes wrong with the exterior? Okay, first up, quite a few owners have mentioned that the rear window can leak. It's a really easy fix. You just got to run some sealant around it and it should stop the leaking. Although it's probably not a good thing that you need to do that in the first place, is it? Okay, next up, a few owners have mentioned that the mirrors can shake, especially at freeway speeds. This might be because they're about the size of a small yacht's sail, or they're just poorly designed. Also on the mirrors, a few owners mentioned they can have some electronic issues like actuator problems, the movement stuff not working, lighting issues, stuff like that. Next up, apparently the daytime running lights are kind of renowned for burning out. Actually, while we're on lighting issues, if the lights do this weird thing where they sort of flash on and off about every 10 seconds, just disconnect the batteries, let it sit for a little bit, reconnect it, and it should sort it out. Basically, that just resets the module and it should solve it. Okay, next up, this isn't what we'd call a common problem, but just something to be aware of. These things weigh heaps, like 3 tons, and if you drive enthusiastically, you are going to go through the consumables at a rate of knots. We're talking brakes, tires, stuff like that. Just budget for extras. Okay, next up, owners of the earlier examples have complained that the paint can be a little bit precious. It can mark and scratch a bit easily. Apparently they did sort this out with the more recent examples though. Actually, just on the age of these, the Sierra has been around since the 1980s, but in this video we're just going to be focusing on the 2500 HD variants of the current generation. These are basically the middle child between the regular Sierra 1500 and the huge 3500 HD. Speaking of huge, when it comes to actually buying one of these things, there is a huge array of different models and options to choose from. 5 different body styles, 2 engine packages, one of which actually has 2 different power outputs depending on it being a pre or post update vehicle, 8 trim spec variants, and potentially the largest list of options and equipment packages we have ever come across. Now we'll get into all of the equipment and features in a second, but if you do need all of the specific details on these, head to ReDriven.com or hit the link below because we've created a completely free Sierra 2500 HD cheat sheet. It will answer all of your questions. But if you're watching this from Australia, you might want to sit down because we're about to discuss what these cost versus what they cost to buy in America. In the US, something like this is going to be asking anywhere from about $85,000 to $90,000 US dollars. Here in Australia, converted for right-hand drive, you're going to be looking at over $200,000. Even when it comes to the very cheapest examples we could find, they hover around about the $160,000 mark. At the other end of the spectrum, like $250,000, which, yeah, I know that sounds like a huge amount of money, but just wait until we give you the full tour of this thing because it is so impressive. Look, I'm sure you're aware this is an enormous vehicle, but just to put into perspective how massive it is, this is what it looks like versus what we would regard as just being a very normal car. But what I find interesting about the looks is that you're either currently leaning into your screen going, oh my God, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen, or you're recoiling away going, oh my God, that is the most excessive, ugly thing I've ever seen. It doesn't seem like there's any halfway point. No one sort of looks at these and goes, oh yeah, I suppose it's okay, I guess. But look, no matter what you think of the looks, I'm guessing you're also possibly thinking, I bet whoever owns this doesn't even take it off-road. I bet they don't even tow with it or put anything in the back. I bet it's just some wanker that bought it for the attention it draws. Yeah, you'd actually be right. See, my mate Ryan owns this, and I'm going to read you a text that he sent me regarding this vehicle and him. I give you full permission to eviscerate me for owning such a mall crawler and never taking it off-road or using it for what it's good for. So look, while we can all throw hate at owners like Ryan for owning this thing, I think it should be celebrated that he's so happy to lean into how ridiculous this thing is. And really, it's no different to anyone buying a supercar or any kind of flashy object. Now, as a sign of appreciation for Ryan being such a legend and lending us his 2500, he's going home with a set of these bad boys. We use Wipertech wiper blades on all of our cars because they are simply some of the best wiper blades we've ever used. Plus, ordering them online and fitting them is so easy. And if you order a set for yourself via the link down there, you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. Get yourself a set. Okay, now common complaints and issues with the interior. A few owners mentioned that they've had some dramas with the HVAC or the air conditioning system. Apparently the air conditioning and the heating and the air delivery mode door actuators can fail. Basically, it's critical to try the air conditioning in every single function. Press every button, make sure it works, because fixing it can sometimes require the entire dashboard to come out, and that is going to be bloody expensive. Actually, just make sure you push every button in here and try everything. Chances are it's going to work, but there are just the odd sporadic reports from owners that certain little electronic gremlins can arise. Next up, a few owners mentioned that the gauge cluster can act erratically, like the speedo won't show you what speed you're actually doing. Not that that's important. But the big common complaint with the interiors comes down to the bloody infotainment system. Now, this does seem to affect pre-2024 models. There are all sorts of issues with the infotainment system. Owners have reported connectivity issues, even with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, Bluetooth dropping out, the screens kind of jumping between different internal apps, the screen locking or freezing up, the entire system resetting itself. Think of a problem that these things can have, and chances are someone out there has had that problem. Now, generally speaking, a software update does fix this, although there are owners out there that have had to replace the entire infotainment system to get it sorted. Now look, I know going over all these issues, it makes out that this car is just a ticking time bomb of problems waiting to go off, but that simply is not the case. General Motors sells around about 850,000 vehicles like this every single year, and the vast majority will be trouble-free. Actually, when you read through the owners groups and forums, the resounding response about the Sierra is overwhelmingly positive. And when you compare how many complaints are written up online versus how many of these things are sold, the odds are pretty good. Basically, think of it this way. If over 40,000 GM-made trucks had reported issues, that only makes up for about 5% of the actual amount sold every single year. So you'd like to think that you're going to be one of the other 810,000 owners that are not going to have a problem. Actually, just on all of the owners groups and forums, a massive thank you to all of you that helped us research this video. You guys are legends. But look, while we're in here, what is this interior like? No surprise, it feels huge. That hugeness also results in incredible levels of comfort. It feels like sitting in a really nice lounge chair with a similar amount of space that most Sydney lounge rooms have. Now, American-made cars and trucks are often accused of cheaping out on the materials used, and they can feel like they've just got really dodgy build quality, but this one doesn't. It feels tough. Everything you touch is solid and purposeful. Even the switchgear, it all just feels so rugged. I mean, it doesn't feel luxurious, but it certainly doesn't feel cheap. It's almost like a premium example of what a work truck should feel like. And then as far as actually using this interior in terms of practicality, you ready? This is amazing. So you've got storage here, like a little bookshelf for the door. Good, an okay sized glove box there. You've got a spot for your phone just here. That's also a charger. Another spot for stuff here. Two big cup holders here. Also another little, I'm going to say that's a cup holder for small pretentious coffees, because I think I could fit one of my espressos in there pretty easily. Another spot for your phone. Whoop, just here. Under here is easily, that is the biggest cubby bin I've ever seen on any car we've ever reviewed. That's amazing. More storage space up here with another little shelf. Huge door bins. A spot here to collect dust and bits of dried skin. Nowhere for sunglasses up there. Oh, more little cubby bins either side of the center console or the transmission tunnel here. So much storage. And then when it comes to features and equipment in here, it's like GMC went, okay, we've built an enormous vehicle, best that we just fill it to the brim with stuff. Look, on top of all the usual stuff that you'd expect, there are some really cool highlights. There are more USB power outlets in here than your local Apple store. Being an AT4, this gets loads of extra kit, including these awesome all-weather floor liners. The AT4X and the Denali Ultimate, they get massage seats, and most models can be optioned with 15 cameras. 15 cameras, and that seems ridiculous, but they'll come in very handy when we get to driving this, which you'll soon see. But that's not all, because when it comes to options, there are no less than 7 different option packs available. That doesn't include all the individual options that you can get. And honestly, the list of those is ridiculous. There is so much. Plus the aftermarket scene for these is massive. Okay, now in the back seat, I'm exactly 3 centimeters taller than another potentially obnoxious American, Metallica lead singer James Hetfield. This is, hang on a sec, Cal, can you bring that picture of Hetfield back up again? That's, is that me in 25 years time? That's uncanny. Anyway, this is in my driving position. And cop this, there is so much space back here. This is unbelievably comfortable. Seats are a little bit on the firm side, maybe because hardly anyone's ever sat back here. But as far as comfort goes, this is absolutely amazing. But the comfort back here isn't the best part, it's the features and just stuff you get. So you get your own air vents, more USB ports, cup holders here, door bins, map pockets, pull down armrests with even more cup holders, and again, I think another spot for another small pretentious coffee like I love. Maybe a double ristretto, macchiato, something like that. But then also, check this out, behind the seats, more storage in here, which is super cool. It's just unbelievable. There's just so much room for activities. Plus, under the seats, even more storage. Amazing. Now, before we get into the back and show you the immense expanse that is the tray, I should mention if you're looking at one of these and it doesn't have the power operated footsteps that automatically come out, getting in and out of this can require a high level of fitness or at least some rock climbing ability. Okay, now in the back, not only does this thing absolutely dwarf most of the utes that we see on Australian roads, can't it handle some weight? Where something like a Toyota Hilux or a Ford Ranger can handle, say, 950 to 1,000 kilos in their tray, this thing can handle easily 600 kilos more than that. And then when it comes to towing ability, again, something like a Hilux or a Ranger, any of that class, generally speaking, they can tow a maximum of about 3.5 tons. A Ram 1500, about 4.5 tons. These things, at least 8 tons, depending on the model and spec, sometimes up to 10 tons. 10 tons! But that's not all when it comes to towing. These things come with some tech called pro-grade trailering systems. And that system, it's so comprehensive, we simply don't have time to cover it all in this video. Go and Google it or watch it on YouTube, it's incredible. But that's not all, because this thing has to have what I would regard as the most ingenious tailgate system of any car, any truck, anywhere in the world. Okay, so first of all, you can open it with the key fob, that's cool. So it looks like a normal tailgate, yeah? No, there's so much more to it. This bit can flip up, so nothing comes sliding out the back. But then, this section flips down, so you've got like a little working tray here, maybe for the laptop, but then also that flips up as well. But that's not all. Flip that down, then flip this down, and this down, and you have a seat just like this, or a step to get up. But even if that's too much effort, then you've got this wonderful marital aid that helps you get up into it. That is amazing. What a genius system. I nearly forgot, depending on how these are spec'd, sometimes this section can be filled with speakers or power outlets or lights. Brilliant. Okay, and then when it comes to safety features, look, it's a bit like the amount of equipment and features inside. There is just way too much to cover, otherwise we'll be here for hours. So instead, how about we cut to a snazzy graphic of the safety features overlaid over some of the most frustrating footage you'll ever see of the previous generation of this. Okay, now the negatives and complaints when it comes to the driving experience, and some highlights too, but let's do the bad news first. Some owners have complained that there can be some harsh downshifts on the 10-speed auto, especially from 5th to 4th, and also when it's in park it can feel like it wants to lurch forward. Now apparently a software update or even replacing the transmission control module or updating the fluids can help this, but on the flip side of that, some other owners have done all of that and have still had issues, and GMC have actually replaced the whole transmission under warranty. Now that raises the question about warranties, especially here in Australia, but we'll get to that soon. Now next up, a few owners complain that at very particular angles, the steering can have a bit of a clunk feel to it. Apparently this is really easy to fix just with some zip ties. Jump on the owners groups, there's heaps of great tutorials on there. A few owners also complain that the adaptive cruise control calibration was just overly harsh. And then there's a common complaint that might be, let's say, more exclusive to Australia. It's the amount of hate that you cop when driving this. Honestly, about the only other car I've driven that draws this level of negative attention is a Lamborghini Aventador, and that thing, my God, that draws some hate. It seems in this, a bit like the Lamborghini, that little boys under the age of 10, they love it, and the occasional bloke here and there, but the overwhelming response I'm getting when driving this is just people going, what the f*** is that? And then there's the issue that for a vehicle that is so incredibly capable, it kind of all falls over the minute you get to a tight roundabout or a small suburban street. It's almost like the car version of those enormous bodybuilders that can lift a house over their head, but then they can't scratch a little itch on their back. Look, it's all very impressive that this can rip a tree out of the ground or cross the Sahara with absolute ease, but then it all sort of falls over the minute you need to try to find a car parking spot in a metro area and just forget about going through most drive-thrus. Now, something else to be aware of is the fuel consumption. Now, a survey of owners was done recently regarding fuel consumption, and on the diesel engines, the overall average was 17.1 litres per 100 Ks. Which, yes, that does sound like a huge number, but remember, this does weigh over 3 tonnes. But you know what? Something's happening to me when driving this, and Ryan warned me of this, and I was so sure he was wrong. But he's right, I'm really starting to love driving this thing. Look, I'm sure you can tell this, but I'm not the most masculine of men, but driving this thing, it makes you feel so tough because you tower over everything. It just gives you this immense confidence. I can feel my ego being stroked every passing kilometre. Honestly, if you have any self-esteem issues, this is such a wonderful band-aid solution. Also, I was so sure that this would be honestly bloody horrible to drive in terms of dynamics and would have no refinement whatsoever, but I was wrong. The steering feel and even the pedal weight is actually quite light, so it has this impression that it's a lot smaller and lighter than it is until you go around a corner and it pitches and rolls all over the place. But we're going to ignore that. On a rough road, like this is really rough, this section, it is a little bit bouncy. That's to be expected. Pretty much every ute and pickup is, but it's way more refined, way more compliant than I was expecting. Actually really good ride quality. And then there are no rattles or weird squeaks with the interior. Even the amount of hate and abuse that you're copping from outside is all pretty muffled thanks to the sound deadening and thick glass. And then in terms of performance, look, this is not a fast vehicle at all, and honestly, thank God for that. But it does get up and go. The minute you floor it, yeah, you progress with much gusto and enthusiasm. Although when you do that, you're also draining your bank account at an alarming rate. And then, look, obviously, it is a bit of a nightmare to maneuver around a tight car park, but because of all the cameras and sensors and everything going off, it's nowhere near as difficult as you'd expect. It's certainly no Corolla, but for something the size of the apartment block that I live in, it's pretty maneuverable. And speaking of clearing your bank account, mechanically, what's the story here? What goes wrong with these? Well, you know, I can't answer that question because I'm not a qualified mechanic. But you know who is? It's Jim.
So the V8 petrol, look, yes, typical GM LS toughness. These things do have a cast iron block, so they're extra tough. Yeah, they are tough, but they're not without their problems though. Quite a few people have reported oil consumption issues, and that is very hit and miss. Some people say they've never used a drop, and other people say they're using a quart every 1,000 miles, whatever that means. Sorry. I mean, who even uses those units of measurements anyway? And these V8s, they are direct injection only, and they are very prone to clogging up the inlets, just like everything that's direct injected these days. Seems to be worse than the ones that use oil. That's just the way the breather system's set up. So that is something you're going to have to clean. Now these V8s do not have cylinder deactivation. That's the displacement on demand or active fuel management, whatever you want to call it. They just don't have it, which is good because in earlier models that was a bit problematic. In this, they don't have it. A lot of owners complain about rough idle issues and fuel consumption problems. Now that has been addressed by GMC, and there are a bunch of recalls where they do software updates for that, and typically that does help with that. And speaking of software updates, these have the Global B platform, which means they can do over-the-air updates, which is nothing really new. A lot of cars do that now. But some owners have experienced these things completely bricking after a software update, and they have to be picked up and taken to the dealership to sort it out. And when a vehicle this big bricks itself, carrying that to a dealership is a bloody nightmare. Also, that software platform is supposed to make these things untunable, but actually that's not really the case. People are actually tuning them. We have also seen some electrical issues from poor connections at the injectors. Again, that's actually another recall, so just follow that up if you have one. Now, map sensor choking up on these is a common problem, and that's just a result of the way the EGR system is set up. It's a pretty common problem with a lot of late model diesels actually, and we're finding that on these things, those map sensors getting clogged up after 20 or 30,000 Ks, so you have to take them out and clean them fairly regularly. From a service standpoint, we're finding with a lot of modern diesels anyway, we just take that out and do it as part of the service now, and it makes a huge difference to the way the vehicles run. Now let's talk about the crank pin failure. Look, that is a thing sometimes, but it is definitely not as common as the internet would have you believe. The problem here is that the harmonic balancer and the oil pump drive are located on the crankshaft with a pin. That pin doesn't drive it, it just locates it when it's being assembled. What really locates it and holds it is clamping force from the crankshaft bolt. Now, if for some reason that's had a new front crankshaft seal or a new harmonic balancer and a new bolt is not fitted and the correct torque is not applied to that bolt, there's not enough clamping force and that can actually slip and shear the pin. So yes, very important, a new bolt and the correct torque every time that comes apart. I should also add that that problem is more common with engines that have been modified. Now that's the same with anything. You make more power with something, it does become more unreliable. That's just the way it is. And that means you might be limited on where you can actually get it serviced. Now the 10-speed transmission in these things, they are getting a bit of a reputation for being not so great. And a fun fact, that transmission is not designed or built by Allison, which you might think it is because that clearly says on the truck Allison transmission. Those transmissions are a joint venture between Ford and GM. Now, although the Ford and GM ones are slightly different, basically they're very similar gearboxes. Now, those transmissions are proving to be somewhat problematic. They're having issues with clutch packs, valve bodies and oil pumps, or oil pump drives specifically, and in some cases it's getting parts. Some of these vehicles, even under warranty, they can be sitting around for weeks and weeks waiting on parts. Now servicing will help with these, especially if you're towing heavy loads. My tip is service it every 40,000 Ks and that will definitely improve your chances of less issues. But the problem is actually getting it serviced. That could be your issue, especially if you have one of these in Australia, because a lot of independent workshops, they are just not equipped to have these. Their hoists aren't big enough, and a lot of cases they just don't have the floor space to do it. So that might actually put some limitations on where you can actually get it serviced.
Now, all of this raises the question about warranty because, yeah, this is an imported vehicle from the US, so what's the situation there? Well, the good news is many importers do offer a 3-year unlimited kilometre warranty. However, like any business, there are some really dodgy operators out there, so read the fine print, do your homework before you even consider buying one. Something else you need to consider before potentially buying one as well is the competition, because this enormous ute segment is absolutely blowing up with competition. For the GMC's $150,000 to $200,000 asking price, you could also find yourself in a Ford F250, a Ram 2500, or maybe its twin under the skin Chevrolet Silverado. And for what all of these are asking, it's a pretty high chance that you're also going to be looking at financing it. And if that's the case, make sure you hit the Driver link down below. Driver will source you the very best finance packages from loads of different lenders. Applying online is super easy and completely free, and doing that is going to have no impact on your credit score. But the question still remains, should you even buy one of these in the first place? If you genuinely require the towing capacity and the loadability and the space and comfort all in one vehicle, absolutely you should buy one. Really only a Ram or a Silverado can do everything that this can do. And they also have their own pros and cons too. But even if you have no intention of using it for what it was designed for, and you're buying it for the novelty factor and because it makes you feel good inside, yeah, sure, why not buy it? See, if you're like my mate Ryan, who has the sense of self and confidence to openly admit that he bought this to, draw attention to himself, well, yeah, it's probably going to draw attention to you too. But just remember, there's a chance that they're not looking at you because they think you're cool. They might think that you're just a wanker. But if you're after a car that draws attention to yourself, but maybe doesn't have any negative connotations attached to it, check this out. And if you're after something like this because it can tow and carry heaps of stuff and you're actually going to use it for what it can do, check this out instead. But if you weren't to buy either of those things, what would you buy instead of one of these? Because surely this is pretty bloody unique. Because you tower over pretty much, sorry, what's going on there?